Hey guys, welcome back to Matters of the Heart and Soul podcast. This is your girl, Janie Charlo, your host, and welcome to another episode. We have on the show today Miss Elizabeth Sanboon. Samboon.
You got it?
Yes, author of Elevators to My Life. All right. I read her book in a day. It's an autobiographical memoir of child torture, trafficking, grit, and grace. And the book is amazing. I mean, I was drawn in. There's so much to talk about today, and we want to just break it down. Elizabeth is when I tell you she's like a real live courageous hero, I would say, that been through so much things that most people would have died from. She is still here and she's told her story in this book, and I definitely recommend it, and we'll talk about how you can get the book and all that. So welcome to the podcast, Elizabeth. Thank you for
Thank
sharing
you.
your testimony with our listeners today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Janie. I really appreciate it. You are such a sweetheart. And, I'm so glad that we were able to do this like very last minute. And I am so proud of you for getting through the book. Like that, to me, that's an accomplishment and a half. But I'm just so honored and just so blessed to be here and just to be able to, I guess, encourage, your listeners and, encourage you as you're going on through this podcast, journey and just getting all of these amazing guests. So that's just super powerful. And I'm really, really proud of you. And I'm just so thankful that you allow people to just, use this space to connect souls and stories. That is such an awesome gift, sweetie.
Yes, and that's what it's about. So I want to dive right in. I'm gonna just read really quickly from the very page one, okay? Because I mean, this is literally how you started it, okay? At the age of 16, my mother was raped by her uncle, my great aunt's husband. This brutal act created me. Throughout her pregnancy, she eased her shame by drowning herself in alcohol, damaging my brain with every sip and causing defects that would last my lifetime. I often wonder if she was trying to cause an abortion, but this is something only God knows. So, Elizabeth, just
Yeah.
take it from there.
Okay. So, well, I guess like the thing with poverty, um, is that I think that there's not enough resources to help people through trauma. And I believe it's like chapter 10 or 12. Like I talk about like, what she was dealing with during that time. Like my aunt was murdered when I was 6 months in gestation. And so there was a huge issue with that. Like her family was like extremely poor and there was like people, it's rumored, now this isn't in the book, but it is rumored that people in my family kind of helped clean up my aunt's murder because of like drug dealings and stuff like that. And so I think that it's just a huge picture of what poverty can do. And
Yeah.
I think that, it's just one of those things that poverty creates trauma and trauma creates more poverty. And it's just sort of this,
It's a
I don't want to
cycle.
say that it's a generational curse, but I will definitely say that it's a cycle. I
Definitely.
don't like using the word generational curse. I think that it has a very negative connotation. I think that it has a lot of condemnation associated with that. And I think
Yeah.
that if you want to be free, it's probably a good idea not to use that when you're
I
talking to
I
people.
agree. I use generational strongholds. I don't
Yes,
I
that's a
don't
good word. I
I
like
don't
that word better than curse because like a
yep.
curse is like there's no, you almost don't get an outlet from it, but
Yep.
generational stronghold, that's a better word because you can break free from a stronghold, but how do you break free from a curse, right? So I like that
Exactly.
word a lot better, sweetie. i think
Yeah.
i think you I think you're onto something.
Yeah, I kind of just doing some of my own self-healing and stuff like that. I came across that there's strongholds that you could break
Yeah.
off and you could be free. So
Hmm.
tell us about, so clearly your mother was raped by her uncle, which created
Hmm.
you, right?
Hmm. Yes.
Um, And in short, and later in the book, you kind of said that it just all came out that you had fetal alcohol syndrome, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
kind of later on.
Yep.
So
Yep.
earlier, was that not picked up on, or?
Well, there's sort of a mixture of diagnoses that I have. So, I think it I think by God's grace, I don't think that I ended up with necessarily fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, as doctors have said. But more recently, I got diagnosed with autism, which makes a lot more sense to me
Mhm.
because, like, I mean, just from my book, like, I ended up writing it in 4 days. And I have like a psychologist friend, and he's like, you know that it's not very normal to be able to write a biography in 4 days. And like I've always had like this thing with like words and like putting stories together and stuff. And like I'm super, super honest. And so I think what doctors thought was like FASD, I think was kind of misdiagnosed when I was younger as to having Asperger's. But by the time I got kind of the pieces of Asperger's had kind of fit in. Like I had already published the book because this was a more recent diagnosis, but I'm thinking that it was probably maybe even a mixture of the two. But
Yeah.
I definitely am more sure that I have like Asperger's than fetal alcohol spectrum disorder because a lot of people that have who are adults that have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, most of them cannot live independently. Most of them don't know how to drive. Most of them. And so I'm like, okay, well, I don't think I necessarily have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, but I definitely have autism. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, yeah.
So for people who don't know what Asperger's are, can you explain briefly what that is?
It's like it's a neurodivergence in the brain. So it's sort of like how to explain it. It's like so there's like it's like high functioning autism. So I'll wake up one day and I'll like, oh, like I want to wear this outfit and my skin is just like, nope, you're not putting that on today. Like it's just not nope. Like I'm really sensitive to noise. I'm very sensitive to um sensations, like anything that's like on my skin. I like, when I sleep, it's almost like, I have to like sleep a certain way. I'm very routine oriented and I kind of am I go into like a little bit of a shock mode when my routine is a little bit disruptive because like I don't know how to handle it. I'm not so great in social settings, but I'm extremely extroverted, but sometimes I can be extremely like introverted where I'm like, nope, I don't feel like going out. I don't feel like dealing with this. So, and I really had to learn social cues. But I think
Mhm.
with girls that have autism, I think that it's very hidden. I think with boys, it's a lot more noticeable. But I
Mhm.
think because the female brain is like very adaptable on so many levels that I think it's
Mhm.
very, very hard to diagnose a female with autism because we just like learn how to mask certain social cues. We're able to sort of like blend in a little bit more. And so it's a little bit harder for girls to be picked up on. But uh textures in my mouth, for instance, like I really struggle with like certain foods. Like I cannot eat peas. Like if I have to eat them, like if I'm at somebody's house and they've served them to me, I won't not eat them.
You said
But I have,
pee?
yeah, peas.
Is
I
it the
cannot,
texture? Is
it's
it
the
the
texture. It is just horrid in my mouth. And so what I've learned how to do is like I will eat them, but I swallow them whole. I don't actually chew them. And
yeah.
I just drink like a lot of water because like I don't want to like offend the person that like served them to me. So
Yeah.
like there's like and I do have like I don't know, I do have some other quirks.
It's
Oh
quite interesting listening to you because, and I know there's the spectrum, right, with
yeah.
autism, but you're probably the first adult that I've talked to with autism. I'm typically talking to like parents of children with autism,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but you're not describing anything that's not like that's majorly abnormal. Like I find myself to be a sensitive. I'm sensitive
Mm-hmm.
to smells. I'm sensitive
Mm-hmm.
to food. I don't like certain textures. I don't eat oatmeal because I don't like the way it feels in my mouth. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's so interesting. I just think that sometimes when we identify things with people, that sometimes it's just gifts. It's just,
It is, and that's one thing that I really learned. Like So, but if I'm like super like, okay, so I'll give you an example. In my book, I think closer to the end of it, and I'm talking about my healing journey. Um,
And
I do
we got
have
to come back to the book.
okay,
We'll come
okay, yeah,
back
I
to
have to come back to that. But yeah, like there are certain obsessions that I have, and like once I get like an obsession, it is really, really hard for me to let go of an
Okay.
obsession.
Okay.
So like if I'm working on a book, I'll forget to eat. Like I'll forget to shower. I'll like and my desk, like my office looks like my desk looks exactly like Einstein's desk, except that
Okay.
it's like full of writing instead of like
Yeah.
mathematical equations, right?
Yeah.
And like I'm like one of those people, like if I have an idea, I can like literally write it for like hours in like 15, 25 different ways and then like flip it on its head and say like, well, this like even with the title of my book, the reason that I called it that was because it was like an allegory, because everyone's afraid of being in an elevator,
Mhm.
or everyone has that loss of control of trying to get to the floor that they want to get to but can't because somebody pushed the wrong button, and so they so it was
Yeah.
something that everybody could relate to. And my husband asked me, he's like, how the heck did you come up with that? And I was like, well, it is sort of like the way that life goes. It's like an elevator to all of these different things. And he's like, but you wrote an entire book on this like really basic like allegory. He's like, not so many people. So it's things like that that like people will just be like, how did you like, I can write a book on like just like small things, but it's just because of the way that my brain works. It's not necessarily that I have a disability, it's just that my brain works really differently and I have no filter. I
Yeah.
have no filter. That's my biggest problem. And I've learned through coaching, like, where like I really have to like say like, okay, is this like a thought for now? Like, is this something that they need to know now, or is this something that you can hold back on? Because with a coach, that is like a huge component, and I really had to hone in on that and be
Yeah.
like, I've really had to learn how to bite my tongue.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's one thing that with having autism, that's like another thing that I really struggled with a long time, because I'm just so honest. I
Yeah.
am so honest. And
I
so
think
I
I think
can't
we need more honesty. I think we need more
I
honesty
don't
in
know.
the world. I'm very honest. What I have learned is that I could be honest as long as I could say it and do it in love. And I think
Yeah,
when
that's the part of the
people,
autistic brain that doesn't work so well, because like I'm honest to the point of like it's so blunt that it's like it was funny because like I was talking to like like when like for instance, if I'm like on Facebook or something, I literally have to ask myself like, okay, okay, I'll give you an example, a perfect example. So we were watching a movie. My husband and I were watching a movie. And I really did not like the antagonist of this particular movie. And
Mhm.
I looked at him and I was like, I just want her to go through a meat grinder and I just want to hear her bones crunch like through the meat grinder. And my husband's like, Elizabeth, like, what the heck? Like, and I was like, but she's so evil. Like, she's so evil.
Yeah.
It's not that I want like the person that's
Yeah.
acting, but her character, like, I just want to put her through a meat grinder.
Yeah. I got it. I get
So
it.
there's just like, yeah, so there's just this like really like serious like brutal honesty that comes out in my private life that most people don't really get like a glimpse of unless they've been
Yeah.
around me for like a really long time. I'm like, okay, like I can like open up about this or open up
Yeah.
about that, but I don't normally talk like that. But he was like, that's honest. He's like, that was like, it's just this like brutal honesty that just comes out
But
sometimes.
honestly, I think you'll be surprised at how many people are honest behind closed doors. Like, I have friends that are very honest, but they're not going to say things in a public platform or something like that. So
Right.
I find that to be pretty normal anyway.
Well,
But
I'm glad.
yes, all right, let's get to the book. So let's start in your 3-year-old self, because you were
Mm-hmm.
very descriptive about that in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, let's talk about that with your mother. You were actually born Mary Ann Break, right?
Break. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then of course you were adopted along the way, and the name was changed.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about what happened to you between 3 and 4 years old. And then what town did you grow up in?
Henrietta, Oklahoma.
All right. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about that town?
Okay, so if you guys are very familiar with the remake of Footloose that was originally done in, I don't know, whatever year that was, with Kevin Bacon a long time ago now, but they remade that movie. But that movie is actually based on Henrietta. Henrietta, for a very long time, it was illegal to dance there until I believe 2017 or 2018. It was illegal to dance,
Wow.
but they had some really bizarre way of doing things. So, anything that was like happening that was like bad behind closed doors, it was like, okay, that's just their problem as long as it's like not being brought up into the open. So everything was like very hidden, everything was like very closed. It was like religious like rigor on the outside, but whatever happened between closed doors, it wasn't going to be something that they talked about unless it was something that they thought was sinful or evil. Then it was going to be brought out into the light, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in my case, so to give you an example, the doctor that delivered me delivered my mom, delivered my grandmother. So it was like generations. My family had originated from California, and they had come in from the potato famine in the 1800s. My great 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 grandmother did the trail from California to Oklahoma 4 or 5 times in horse and carriage. So this is a very old town. It was an old mining town. It's based on the town is actually kind of built around Indian reservations, some burial grounds, a lot of sorry, I get choked up when it talks
Yeah,
about like when I
that's
talk
okay.
about racism,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a lot of
Racism.
yeah. And so for instance, like the town library, okay. It's so funny. I can talk about my own story, but then when I talk about like other people's trauma, I can't handle it. It's so weird.
Yeah.
But it was
Town
the
library.
it was the town library, and it was used for, hanging black people,
Hmm.
lynching them.
Did you
And
witness that? Did you?
no, I
Okay.
didn't,
So that's
but
just a part of the history of the town.
that's a part of the history of this town.
Okay.
Part of my history. So my great grandfather, my grandmother's dad, he hated girls. And there was a night that he just burned a whole bunch of Bibles and like put a curse on all of the Eslit girls, saying, they're never going to amount to anything. Like they're going to be, in poverty. And like he just did it because he just like really hated the family. And so he like, there was like a lot of like dark entities. If you go to my grandmother's house, like it is known that dolls start walking around by themselves. There's a lot of satanic
Yeah.
stuff like attached to my grandmother's shack in Henrietta. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you were very descriptive in the book. I mean, you even described yourself in the womb of your mother as being in the belly of the beast. I mean, it
Yes.
was
Yep.
very descriptive.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you tell us a little bit about how did how you were sold for money,
Yep.
basically?
Okay. So what happened is so to give you a little bit of backstory, the person that's on my birth certificate isn't actually my dad. He was my deceased aunt's fiance, but he kind of wanted to kind of have something like to remember my Aunt Judy by. So he hooked up with my mom temporarily, and he decided to put his name on my birth certificate, but he's not actually my dad. So
Is
they
that
were,
who you're now? But your mother was raped by your
yes,
uncle.
yes, she was
Okay.
raped, but we don't know if he knew that or if she lied, like it, but it was confirmed by my grandmother because my editor actually like did like huge long interviews with her.
Okay.
It was confirmed that she was raped, but she never actually told. I think she was trying to pass me off as this guy's kid, right? Because I think she was just really ashamed of it. So they were together for a little while, I think like 8 or 9 months. And then he was like, I don't want to have anything to do with you. Like, you're nothing like Judy. And so my mom was single again. And then when I was 2, she found this guy and she had had an affair with a cop. And it was actually the cops. My brother is actually the policeman officer's son. And this guy knew that, but still wanted to claim him as his own. But he hated, with a passion, he hated girls. So I didn't like him very much. I was super avoidant. Again, me being honest, me being brutally like, I wasn't, even as a kid, I was not going to play that game of like, I'm going to attach because, I feel like attaching or it's the right thing to do. No.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't attaching to him. And my mom was growing really concerned because she wanted to marry this jerk. Sorry, that was kind of me. The guy. Okay,
Yeah.
it's the guy.
Got it.
So we were having this conversation on my bed, and my mom said to me, she said, Mary, I need you to like John. And I was like, I don't want to.
Right.
And she's like, but you have to because like our financial position like really depends on it. And she's like, you want me to be happy, right? And I'm like, yes, mom. Or actually I called her Linda at that time. I was like, yes, Linda, like I want you to be happy. And I looked at her and I was like, all right, I surrender. I will attempt to attach.
And you're about
So
4, right? At this time.
yeah, I'm about 3. I'm about three and a
Okay,
half.
okay.
So I jump off the bed and my little bare feet hit the floor and I jump onto the couch. And we were watching a movie and a commercial had come on and I had kind of did this with my arm. So I'm sitting here and I wrap my arm kind of like around his neck. He takes a cigarette, lights it to my skin. I scream. My mom takes me to the hospital and the doctor said, well, Linda, this is a 3rd-degree burn. This isn't accidental. He said, I really should be calling social services. I should call the police, but because, I know you and I delivered her, I delivered you, and I delivered your mom, I'm not going to say anything. And she went back. I don't know how she did it. Like, honestly, I don't, but
Mind, in your 3.5, 4-year-old mind, what is this telling you?
um, I was I was still trying to figure it out. Like I didn't know why I had gotten burned.
Yeah.
I didn't know, and I think instinctively I was like, he just doesn't like me. Like I felt like I had done something wrong by cuddling up with him, and I just felt like this is completely my fault. So a couple of weeks later, my mom, and I was rebellious. I didn't listen. My mom tells me, she's like, okay, Mary, like I'm gonna go to work now. You need to stay in your room. Well, I had voices coming in from my room because I was in my mom's room. I was sleeping in her bed. And it was summertime and I heard voices and I got curious. Stupid me. I got curious. And I saw John and these 2 other men exchange money. And I stupidly asked for money.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, well, in order for you to get money, like you're gonna have to do this. And so then they hog tied me with my hands behind my back and gagged me and they gang raped me. And I was left, I passed out and I was wearing a white nightgown. Oh my gosh, it was so pretty. It was kind of like that, like really light cotton, that has like the pretty eyelets like around like the hem and like on like the little sleeves and stuff. It was soaked in blood. My underwear was soaked in blood. The blood had congealed so badly that it actually acted like kind of like an adhesive to the floor. I just remember it being like so sticky. And then I freaked out because there was this huge mess of blood. And I was just like, what am I going to do? Like, my mom can't see this. She's going to like freak out. And like, I can't have that. Like, she needs this person. I need to do like, I need to be good. And so I ended up, it was dark now. Like, it was kind of light, like when this all started, but by this point it was dark. And I just remember taking it and just kind of like balling it up and then throwing it underneath the bed.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what else happened, but from that night, I don't remember too much about that night. I don't know if I had just gone to bed or what, but a few weeks later, after that, neighbors and my mom noticed that I was bleeding profusely. I was wearing pads at this point, and I wasn't even playing anymore. Like, I was just complaining of like really severe stomach trauma. Like, I just felt really sick all of the time.
Yeah.
And what happened, the reason that they found out was because, so he had raped me one time in a closet, and he was removing this like blue carpet. And there's all of these adults around, and I'm stamping my foot and saying, Mommy, Mommy, where's my blood? Where's my blood, Mommy? Like, where did it go? And one of the people that was in that circle knew my grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
And she talked to my grandmother, and she said, we have suspicions that she's being trafficked. Like, she's not leaving the house. She's wearing pads. She's not ever outside anymore. And all of these men are coming and going from the house.
Yeah.
And my grandmother was like, okay, like she's being trafficked. And I remember one day, I had been held up by my throat, and then they had moved their hand from my throat to my chest, and like three men were just like burning me on my feet. I had images of having vaginal sex with him with my mom being in the shower. I had images of child porn. And it was really weird and like very kind of like out of like almost like an out of body experience. Like, when I actually heard, like when my editor asked, and when she asked my grandmother, did you know that Marianne was trafficked? And she said yes. It was kind of surreal.
Yeah.
Like, it was like, it was very, very surreal in that point. And I actually told my editor, I was like, look, I don't know if I can handle this entire interview with you interviewing my grandmother. I said,
So the grandmother knew or your mom knew?
Everybody. And like, my grandmother knew for sure.
Okay.
The doctor knew some stuff was going on.
Yeah.
And my mom's best friend knew because she reported us to the Child Protective Services of Henrietta. So essentially, what happened is my mom had gotten a court order saying that if she did not show up on this given date, that there was not going to be a chance for her to fight for custody. They were just going to automatically remove us. This was like an emergency court hearing that she had to attend. So my mom, not wanting to face charges, obviously, because, there was already a whole bunch of like doctor's reports and stuff like that. She ended up fleeing from Henrietta, Oklahoma, and then she had gone to San Antonio.
Okay. And so that's how you guys escaped that part.
Yes, that's how we escaped that part. Yes.
Okay. So just to recap, because
yes,
I know that's tough, right? That's a very tough spot right there.
Mm-hmm.
So, this was your mother's boyfriend, right? But he was the father of your brother, right? Or no? All right, guys. So we had a little technical difficult, but I was just recapping what Elizabeth just said. So, this was your mom's boyfriend,
Yes.
your brother's father. Was he your brother's father or no?
He was my brother's father on paper, but not
Okay,
genetically.
got
Not
it,
genetically.
got it. A
And
lot
that was
of that.
actually her husband because they actually got married. Like she
Okay,
actually married. Yeah, she married him. Yeah, she
okay.
did marry him.
And it kind of started with just one day you were trying to connect to him and he burned you with a cigarette or cigarette
Yeah.
lighter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That ended up in a trip to the hospital. The doctors
Yes.
were very suspicious, but
Yeah.
kind of the town that you're in, everyone's like, we'll just let it pass this time, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Then your one day your mom goes to work. She tells you stay in your room, Elizabeth, but curious 3.5, 4 year old Elizabeth does not do that. She comes
No.
out, she hears some men talking and exchanging money.
Yes.
That is when you were raped
I was 3. Yeah. I was. Yeah. And I
first.
was 3. Yeah. That was
Now
the first time I was
at
raped.
that time, was this a vaginal rape? Was what type of rape?
Um, I believe. I believe it was both because I just it was like it was I'm not sure if it was both or if it was I know that it was the one because like the blood was
Yeah,
so bad. Like
yeah.
it was so so bad. And the thing was too is like it wasn't just like a little bit. It was like to the point that I was wearing like adult like feminine products
And
at that point.
where were you getting adult pads? And how was no one
Um
noticing that you were wearing adult pads like at
so
three and a half years old?
they knew that I was wearing them because I had them in my underwear. And it's really weird too because when I got adopted into my first family, she was like really suspicious because I was meddling with her pads and I knew exactly how to use them. And
Mhm.
she was like, this is kind of weird. And I knew exactly like how to put them in the trash can and like I knew exactly what they were for.
Yeah,
And I think this is where my mom's friend kind of was like, this isn't normal. Like
right.
there's something seriously messed up with this. And I remember like, when you talk about, I'm going to be a little bit graphic here, but when you talk about like pelvic flooring exercises and Kegels and stuff to like strengthen your pelvic flooring after childbirth, ever since I was a little kid, if I laughed too hard, if I ran too hard, if I did anything, like even when I sneezed, even as a kid, 4, 5, 6, I would pee my pants.
Yeah.
And I realized that that's not normal. Like there was a lot of vaginal, like trauma
Yeah.
that happened because that's not normal. Little kids don't do
No,
that,
it's
right?
not
And
normal.
so there and like I had just the stomach pains. Like I do remember like laying on the couch and my mom would be like, do you want to go outside and play? And I'd be like, no. Like I was like just melancholy and just sad and sick and just
Yeah.
not really engaged at that point, right? And
Yeah.
then and that was like kind of hard because like my brother like needed me, but during that time like I don't really remember like really caring for him at that point,
Yeah.
right? Compared to like when I was in Texas. And so I feel kind of bad because it's like I know that if I wasn't like taking care of him, then he was probably being abused.
Yeah.
But during that time, I don't really remember what was happening with him.
Yeah, and you talked about that in the book because you are a 4 year old and you were trying to look out for your baby brother who was maybe 1.5 at the time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was like, this young baby who's a baby herself, 4 years old, here she is trying to mother another baby. And it's amazing just how you were so descriptive with that. And it's amazing how you all your survival skills just really kicked in for you to survive this stuff. And it's amazing. So
Mm-hmm.
let's move forward. Okay. So someone does report this to Child Protective Services.
Mm-hmm.
Your mom decides to run to
Mm-hmm.
Texas.
Mm-hmm.
You're now in Texas. And how
Mm-hmm.
do you go from there, living with family, into now going into like I guess through adoption?
Yeah.
Your
Okay.
first
So my
family?
aunt, yeah. So her aunt and uncle. So my great uncle and my great aunt, not the people that raped her, a different
Right.
relative. They had a teenage daughter named Darla, who was the same age as my mom. So they took care of us for a while, and really bad stuff started happening. Um, so my brother was just being completely neglected, and
Yeah.
he was being starved. I was living off of dog food,
Yeah,
but
I
I
remember
managed.
you mentioned that. Like you guys were just
Yeah.
whipped for no reason,
Yeah,
eating
we were
dog
just like
food.
barely like surviving, and like it was hard for me because like I could change like his wet diapers were like not so
Yeah.
much of a problem for me to change, but man, the poopy ones, like I would get like poop like
Yeah.
everywhere. Like I don't know why I couldn't figure it out, but like it was like easy for me to like change him. And then what I would do is there was like a dresser that was like next to the crib. So I learned how to like crawl up the dresser, and then I kind of like learned how to sort of like belly flop from like the dresser into the crib to like change him, and I would like pretend to read him stories and stuff. And I would pass like milk through sometimes like the crib bars, and I would
Yeah.
come out and tell that like I would tell like people, like either my mom or who was ever in the living room. I would be like, Clayton pooed, like Clayton, like his diaper needs to be changed, and they would just kind of ignore me, and then I would just do the best that I could changing it. I failed so bad, like I failed so
But
bad.
you do, I mean, you've processed that you know that that was never
Well, no,
your
I mean, I'm
responsibility.
thinking about it now, and I'm like, come on, like how well do you think a 4-year-old would
Yeah,
really be able to change a
like,
diaper like that, you know? But
yeah.
at the time, like I just felt so like so helpless, and so what sometimes I would do though is like if it was getting like really really chaotic in my house, I would give him piggyback rides out of the house, and we would like, and I would have like I would take whatever food I could, because at 4 I knew how to open up cans like with can openers and
Yeah.
stuff. So I knew how to do that. Um I knew how to get the milk from the carton into the bottle. It was a mess, but I learned how to do it kind of. And
Yeah.
so I would just like take him with me, and we would escape for a couple of hours, and then it was getting pretty violent though. I remember us getting beaten really bad with belts, and I would often stand in front of him and my great uncle so that way I would get the beating instead of my brother. And I I was kind of I was very protective of my mom and my brother. Like the last the last day when we were moving from Texas, my mom told me the story, and she said he was going after me, and she said you just ripped into him, and like I bit him so bad, like there was just like blood like just spewing all over the room. Like I literally took like a chunk out of his arm,
Her
and he
husband.
back yeah, of her husband, and like he like completely backed off. And so I learned how to kind of like I would sometimes like, huddle over my brother's body and just like take the beatings for him and
Yeah.
stuff. And like, but it got pretty gruesome because my uncle had a really bad temper, and I think my mom knew something had happened. she was at work, and my uncle had gotten, I don't remember her name. It was just some girl in the tub. And I heard all this screaming, and I had gone into the bathroom, and there was like blood everywhere. I mean, just everywhere. And I was like, okay, I've got to get towels. I've got to like stop the bleeding. I've got to like help her. Like she's gonna like die. And I remember them like they were sitting at the table, and they were just kind of like laughing at me because I was trying to like find washcloths, and I was like demanding like, where are the washcloths? Where are the towels? Like I need to stop the bleeding. And they're like, we don't have anything like that. And I was like, she's gonna die. Like she's gonna die. And I just kept like saying this like over and over again. And like there was like literally like nothing I could find to like, or nothing. I'm sure I could have like come up with like blankets or something, but in my mind I was just like, for some reason, like I don't know why I didn't think about it, but in the chaos of everything, I was just like, there's no towels, there's no washcloths. Like, how do I stop all this blood? And I like remember too, like I remember seeing like kind of look like spaghetti noodles in her hair, and like it didn't register until like I was older. Like it was actually like brain matter, like was like
Mm.
mashed into her like
Was
her
she
scalp, right?
shot or what was
No, he had just taken her head, and he just like banged it up against the clawfoot tub so much that he just like he gave like I don't know, like he just cracked her head open up on the bathroom, like the side of the
you
tub.
so you never really knew who this woman was. This is
No, I didn't.
okay.
This was just like it was
In the
just
uncle's
some poor
house.
girl. Yeah, just some poor girl that was
So,
probably there at the wrong time, wrong place. And
yeah.
so she calls me over, and she's like, Mary, she's like, it's okay. She's like, there's nothing you can do. She's like, I'm gonna go to be with Jesus now. And I was like, no, you can't unless you're gonna take me with you. And she's like, no, you're too little, like you can't go.
Mhm.
And she's like, can you pray with me? Because she's like, I'm about to die.
Hmm.
And I just remember praying with her. And then I remember like a whole bunch of cops just like came into my house, and like there were two cops in the bathroom. And I lost plate, and I don't know where my brother was at this time. Like I think he was playing with one of the other cops, but I really don't remember.
Yeah, I'm sure it's dim. Yeah.
And so this one cop like picked me up, and he was like dancing with me and stuff. And I was wearing like this short little nightgown, and I was doing this thing with my dress where I was like twisting it up in my finger and like letting it go. I still do that to this day. It's such a funny little weird habit that I developed as a kid. And he was asking me like what happened. And I said, he killed her. He banged her head against the tub, and like he killed her. And so he was like yelling at me, and the cop was like trying to decipher like what really happened and like who to believe. And like I don't know like ever like whatever happened with like the result of that. But I do remember that night my mom came home, and I could not get, like I bit my nails pretty bad, but like the cuticles like the like were beet red, and I could not get the blood out of like underneath my fingernails. And she was like asking them, and she's like, what is all of this red stuff under her nails? And they're like, oh, it's just hair dye. It's just hair dye. And she's like, and I remember the conversation. My mom was like, this is not hair dye. Like, this is something entirely different. Like, it's not coming off. And it was shortly after that that my mom had she was thinking about putting us up for adoption because she realized that we were being like really abused while she was going to work. And she had contacted this agency in San Antonio called Adoption Services Associates. And so she had gone there, had talked about it, decided to keep us. And then I think this was sort of the thing that kind of like made that decision for her. And she was like, I'm just going to relinquish them. Um, I do remember getting beat. I had dusted off some white powder off a table. I had gotten beat for that. And I was drugged too. I was drugged pretty bad. They used to drug my dog too. I remember my poor little dog. I had a little doggy,
Giving them
and
what or giving you what? Do you know or
I
not?
don't know what they gave me, but I was really, really happy. And then all of a sudden, like I was spinning really fast. Like it was kind of fun at first. And then as I was spinning, I was like vomiting, like really like bad
Yeah.
vomiting, like really, really bad vomiting. And I passed out like in the corner of like the hallway. And I kind of remember vaguely in my memory, like my mom being like, "What happened to Mary?" And they're like, "Oh, you know, she's fine. She's just like a little sick." And I just kind of remember my body being like really limp as she put me into bed. I don't know what they gave me,
Yeah.
but it made me unconscious. I know that it made me, it didn't, it, like, I didn't have the ability to speak. I could hear like auditory sounds, but I couldn't move. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure what they gave me. I'm thinking it might have been crank, which is, it's like methamphetamines, because my mom was taking methamphetamines at that time, and she actually had a drug dealer that was coming to her house, and
Mhm.
her name was Linda too. And so there was a lot of drugs
Yeah.
that you know
I
that
was
were
going to
being.
ask you, the adults that were around you, I mean, drug addiction, was there anything else? I know you said there was still dark energy, dark entity. Like, was there anything else you could in hindsight figure out? I know poverty, like was there anything else that while the adults around you were just so neglectful on
I
so
think
many
it's
levels?
I think it's I think it's just, I don't want to sound like, this is going to sound very politically incorrect, but I don't really know how else to say this. I think it's just hillbilly mentality, you
Mhm.
know, where it's like, you know, let the kids just kind of do whatever they want, you know, and, you know,
Yeah.
kids aren't supposed to, you know, they're not supposed to be seen, they're not supposed to be heard. And it was just sort of like the gross poverty
Yeah.
that, like, I'll fast forward a little bit. So I brought my grandmother up to Canada for a little while, for 3 months, and like she didn't know how to use a knife or fork. She didn't know how to use an elevator. She didn't know how to use an
What year
escalator.
was this?
20 2013, 2014.
Wow.
And she
Okay.
just like she'd never seen an Asian person before. Like it was just like, I think that there is like, when you're that uneducated, I think you just really don't even know how to take care of kids. You
Wow.
know what I mean? Like there is just like a
Yeah.
really like, it's not, it's almost like I can't I can't really blame her, because like she's like, I mean, she only had an eighth grade education. She got
Yeah.
married when she was like 14. She had 7 kids.
Yeah.
So it's like, how much education, how much, you know, how much have you developed intellectually? How much have you
Yeah.
developed emotionally
Yeah.
to be able to really step into this place of what's right, what's wrong, if you still have a mentality of a 14-year-old,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
And so there's this, I think it's just that mentality of kind of like 1920s kind of
Yeah.
thing that is
I
just
mean,
kind of
lack
been.
of education, lack of knowledge, mixed with extreme poverty and closed-minded,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
wanting to know better
yeah,
is
that
another
too.
thing. So I
Yeah.
understand that. So let's fast forward because I tell you guys, it's an amazing read. It's a really good read. I mean, I was drawn in, and I want our readers to kind of get some good nuggets out of here. Elizabeth, she is adopted into a family who has fertility issues, and I
Yes.
really want you to touch on that because I love that you said that, for adoptive parents, like it's not going to adopting a child is not going to fix your marital issues. It's not going to fix infertility. It's not going to make you happy. So
Mhm.
know what you're getting into when you're adopting a child.
Mm, yes. I have to say, like you had asked me in my email, you're like, you know, I wanted your views on adoption. And I have, okay, out of all of the people that I have encountered in my life, I think I've only approved like maybe 4 or 5 people in my whole life and been like, you would make a good adopted family, or you would.
You have children of your own, and
Yes.
we got to touch on that
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have also put up for adoption. But
Yes.
we'll come back to that. And I tell
We'll
you,
come back to that. We will come
yeah, I
back to
mean,
that.
it's Elizabeth's story is a very, I mean, it shows you how strongholds, generational strongholds, and if you don't understand and you're not conscious or aware of what's happening, how these cycles just repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat. I mean, her story, like I said, is one of bravery. It really is.
So I think that, okay, I will be very bluntly honest. I don't think that interracial adoption is the best for the child. I think that it's
I
in
can
for the
see that. Yeah. And
I
I
think
think
it's
we
I
kid
think
ourselves when we don't. Like when we say,
yeah, yeah,
oh, we could just
yeah.
love them, but that's not enough for a
No,
child to know who
no,
they
it's
are.
not. And I think that there are okay, so I am not pro abortion. Okay, I'm very pro life. But I think that there is this misconception in certain circles that people think, well, adoption will fix this issue. And I think that the adoption narrative as it stands is essentially like, okay, if you've messed up, if you've had sex before marriage, if you are uneducated, if you don't have XYZ, then it is God's will for you to put up your child. Okay. I want to back up a little bit. So, I'm gonna dive deep into this because this is something that I'm very, very passionate about, and this is something that I'm not gonna like, I'm gonna do it like no holds barred. Okay. So let's 1940s, 1950s, it was still illegal in the United States for interracial couples to marry, but it was not illegal for people to adopt African American children.
Hmm.
This is huge.
That is
Okay.
huge.
This is huge.
Mm-hmm.
The adoption narrative did not come into play until after there were laws protecting animals. The protection of animals actually went in first and said you could not abuse an animal, and child protective services actually came from that. And they basically said, well, if you can't abuse an animal, I guess technically you really can't abuse a child. The other thing that happened too was for hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years, it really didn't matter how many people were in a household. But suddenly in Republic, white America, and around the 1970s, they started making housing zones, basically saying that if you have children, that you have to have an adequate number of bedrooms for these children. Why? Thousands and thousands of years, the Irish people had 15, 16 children that were, they did the best that they could. They had family, they had, farmland, and the kids just wore hand-me-downs for generations, and all of these kids came out hardworking, normal, with a good sense of identity and all of this kind of thing. But suddenly with this housing thing, it was sort of like, well, if you're not rich enough, then there are other people that can have your children.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the fact that there were African slaves that were breastfeeding white children, and these white families were able to basically house whatever kid that they wanted, and just if they couldn't have a child of their own, they could just take one off of the plantation. As long as it was white enough, fair enough, they would raise it as their own with whatever story they wanted to do that with. It is, and I've seen adoption from a lot of different angles. And so before people, throw shade at me, understand I've been through, I have 3 birth certificates underneath my belt. I have witnessed international adoption in Brazil. My brother is also adopted. I have another sibling that's adopted. I've seen the after effects of, my mom, going through her 2 adoptions. the kidnapping of my two children through a cult. So like there's a lot of pieces here. So before people are like, oh, well, you're not an expert because you haven't adopted, I actually wanted to, but there was no way that I was going to be the villain in someone else's story. As a matter of fact, when I went to apply to be a foster mom, they said, wow, they're like, you have so much information, you are such a good person. And I was like, but will any of these foster things lead to adoption? And they said yes. And I said, I cannot do that to somebody else's family. If
Yeah.
I'm going to house a child temporarily, that is one thing. But I said, I am not going to claim ownership of someone else's child, because I said, I am not going to become the villain in someone else's story. I said, that is not what I am on this earth for. The other thing that you have to understand too is why are African American children cheaper than Caucasian children?
And we're speaking on adoption prices.
Yeah, we're talking about adoption prices, and you can actually Google it. There are sites that you can go to, and it is actually
that's interesting, because I've never, I have my own son, that I gave birth to. So I've never gotten into adoption and the price and the cost, but I know people who have, went through that process. So is that current today?
Yes. Yes, it is actually. It is.
So why is it cheaper?
Because Caucasian children are more in demand. And the sickening thing behind that is because wealthy people are afraid that, oh my gosh, this is so hard to talk about. It's so hard.
I know what you're gonna say though.
It's so hard. It is so hard. Like, I can talk about my own story, but when it comes to like racism and like the way that the world is, like, I have like a harder time talking about that kind of stuff. When it comes about like other people being bullied and other people being like demonized, I have a really hard time talking about it, because it, like, I don't know, it does something to me. I can talk about being sexually trafficked all day long, but when it comes to like other cultures and other people's beliefs and stuff, I have a really hard time like talking about it. But there is this stigma that says that if you have an African American child, that there is a higher chance of them being drug addicted. There's a higher chance of them being addicted to coke. There's a higher chance of them being addicted to methamphetamines. And so most people want the Caucasian baby. And so organizations have said, well, because there is such a need for African American children to be housed, which makes no sense to me considering the fact that the laws essentially set it up that way. When you look at the laws and how it's stacked against socioeconomic backgrounds, it's really frightening. And so they're like, okay, we'll knock off, like, it's literally $10,000 to $15,000 cheaper to adopt a Black child than a Caucasian child.
That's interesting.
And the thing that really like irritates me is the fact that you have people that do GoFundMe's for their gotcha day or their adoption day, but then when you have females that are saying, you know what, like, I've been left, I've been abandoned, can you help me? It's always like, we'll just put your child up for adoption because that's God's will for you.
Wow.
And this is my comeback to it. It's like, if it was God's will for you to have that baby, then he would have put it in your uterus with your husband's sperm, and it should have been, if it was really, in the plan for you to have a child. And a lot of people think that that means that I'm anti-adoption. And the thing is it depends, because I would say that the majority of adoptions, unless somebody is actually walking in on their own volition and saying, I don't want my child, and they're actually going into an agency without pressure, without coercion, without blackmail, all of that kind of stuff, then I would say, okay, that person really understands the validity of what they're doing, and they understand, the consequences and stuff like that. The problem with it is as soon as a mom sort of changes her mind, it's sort of like, oh, well, that you can get pictures. Oh, no, that you can get letters. Oh, no, that you can do a completely open adoption. But here's the thing that a lot of people don't understand. When it comes to adoption, it doesn't matter what the adoptive parents sign, because they can literally change the rules on that biological mom at any given time that they see fit.
Mm-hmm.
And no other contract in the world could you do that with. If I sign a contract with my editor that says I'm going to get 35% of that commission and they don't follow through with that 35% commission, I can go to a lawyer and I can say, they broke the contract, they're responsible, you have to pay me that money back. But when it comes to adoption
Yeah.
contracts, it's like, oh, well, if we decide that, for whatever reason we don't like you anymore, we can just stop doing open adoption. We can stop doing visitation. We can stop doing letters, and we don't necessarily have to send you pictures if we don't feel like it.
Yeah. And adoptions are typically private agencies, right? So they
Yes.
they have their
And if you
own
want to look,
guidelines.
yes. And if you want to look at why there have been so many abortion laws changed over the last 6 months, it is because adoption agencies have gone to the people of power and said, we're not getting a fair cut of the baby industry. And so essentially what they said is, this is going to allow people we can make millions of dollars through adoption. And so the states were like, you know what? Technically, we get more money through the state through adoption. Why? Because we have to employ social workers, because we have to employ lawyers, because we have to employ, psychiatrists and therapists and all of this other stuff. But the reality of it is, if that doesn't scream that adoption brings trauma, I don't know what else does. If people
Yeah.
are willing to put billions and trillions of dollars for all of these agencies to sort of suddenly pop out of the middle of nowhere, and there's a huge billion-trillion-dollar industry on adoption tourism that nobody else wants to talk about.
Wow. You've enlightened me today. Because again, if it's not really, a part in your backyard, it's something you don't look at. And it's something
Yeah.
I just never really dived into. But you've
Mm-hmm.
really enlightened me today. So let me ask you, do you feel adoptions, is it to protect children or is it to make
No,
money?
it in okay, I will tell you this. So a lot of Hispanic people that are dealing with immigration, and if they are in a loss of housing or if they're in a loss of resources and they, are just considering going to an adoption agency, one of the very first things that adoption agency will say sometimes, and a lot of times, is saying, well, if you don't give us your child for placement, we're going to report you to ICE.
Wow.
And it is literally to give the upper middle class and the higher 1% children, and it whatever cost that comes at, it doesn't matter. I actually read a book called God in the Alley. If you have not read this, it's an amazing book. It's written by Greg Laurie, and I have this book completely memorized. In the very end, I think it's on page 27 or 28. No, like 127. It's like at the very end of the book. He's talking about all of these homeless people taking communion. And he said there was one lady that was taking communion. She had sold her child to a human trafficker in Toronto for $500. She sold her baby for $500. And it was really interesting because I made a prediction to my husband. I said, mark my words. I said, now that, and I actually made like Facebook videos about this too. I said, mark my words, people. When all of these, when abortion ends, I said there are going to be more and more sites or more and more people trying to put up their children for adoption to get money. I am in a surrogacy group, and within the last 2 months of Roe versus Wade being overturned, I mean, it's only been like a little bit of time, I've already seen like 2 or 3 ads in the surrogacy forum asking people if they will buy their children. Buy them. Buy them.
Yeah.
And when you have people saying, oh, can you please do a GoFundMe because we need $25,000 to adopt, but that same single mom needs $25,000 to adopt, we will tell the biological mom no, but we will put money towards fundraisers and
Right.
all of
Right.
that kind of stuff for an
Right.
adopted family. But if it's really empowerment, if it's really pro family, why are we not allowing people to stay with their children?
Right. Let's give
Because
that same $25,000 to that biological mother so she could put food on her table and feed her family and that type of thing.
Yep.
So yeah, that's why I said you've enlightened me a lot on this whole adoption system because
Yep.
it's another system.
It is. It's another system.
Yeah,
It is just
it's
another
another
system.
system. All right, so we have to keep moving. Otherwise, we could talk all day. There's again, get her book, Elevators to My Life. Where are you at today? Where are you at today? Healing
Well,
journey.
it's kind of funny. So, I went through this massive rigmarole of my life, and I was in a really abusive relationship 10 years ago. And
Where your two kids, your biological
no,
kids.
that
Okay.
that that's a totally different situation. So I got married, and I'll briefly skim over that. So at 19, I had met this guy over the internet. He was super amazing. I was head over heels in love with him. We got married. We planned a family, and he was having issues with immigration. We moved from Oklahoma to San Antonio with my adopted family. And at this point, I was mega attached to them because I had just encountered my entire birth story with my biological mom. And I was like, I love them now and they love me now. And I put them on this really high pedestal. And I was just like, okay, like I'm officially healed. I was in church. I was doing the whole church thing. I was doing Bible study. I was in choir. I was a youth minister. Like I was just doing I was like God's best advocate. Okay. Like if you were a sinner, I was going to come to your door, pray with you, save you, it's going to all be magic and rainbows. Well,
And
my parents,
Elizabeth talked about spiritual abuse in her book too, because that's a whole
that's
nother
a
type
whole
of
other,
abuse.
that's a whole other realm. I don't have enough time to
I
go
know
into
we don't
all
have
of
enough
that.
time, but really briefly, what she talked about was this your adoptive family or
Yes.
foster?
Yes.
Okay, I
No,
couldn't
they
remember.
had legally adopted me.
But in the name of God
Religion.
and the
Yeah.
Bible and Jesus,
Yeah.
they were inflicting abuse on her,
Oh
right?
yeah. Oh
It
yeah.
was crazy.
Exorcisms.
It was crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really bad. So I
But
thought
read the book
that,
to get that.
yeah, you have to read the book to get that part. So I'm thinking okay, I'm older now, my parents have forgiven me, we're all good. Well, what I didn't know is that there were people in my extended family that were dealing with infertility, and I didn't know this. My parents were essentially keeping record of all of my marital problems and stuff, and when my marriage fell apart because my husband ended up getting tempted with drugs, um, my parents stalked him, threatened him with immigration, never allowed me to tell his family in England, who happened to be extremely wealthy, by the way, and I never got to tell anybody what was going on. And my parents basically said, if you don't give us your children, then you're disobeying us and you're going to hell. Now, because I had experienced so much spiritual abuse from the time I was 11 up until now, of course, I'm terrified thinking if I don't do exactly what my parents say, this is actually going to happen to me, God's going to punish me and I am going to go to hell. They were coerced. They were illegal. They were full of blackmail. They weren't even legal adoptions. It was just guardianship papers. And I signed them under duress. He signed them under duress because my parents actually had a private investigator that was actually stalking him and following him. And when my parents found out where they lived, my mom and a caseworker just showed up unexpectedly and sort of just if you don't sign these, we're going to deport you. It was super, super horrible. And so it wasn't even a legal relinquishment. And then halfway through all of this, my family's like, oh, by the way, we've already talked to people in our church. They want your baby that you're currently pregnant with. And I was like, what do you mean? And so the day that I had gone into labor, my mom was like, oh, you need to fill out this particular paperwork to make it easier for them to get birth certificates and social security numbers for her. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Mm-hmm. And my brother just recently told me that apparently they had lied to both of the families, saying that I had predisposed my kids to drugs, which I never did. And my brother actually like defended me, and he recently confronted my dad, and he was like, what right did you have to completely destroy her life?
Yeah.
And my dad was just like, well, it was God's will for the kids to go to different people.
Yeah. And this was your religious.
Yeah, this was my religious, like, Christian family that did this. Now, I will tell you that as a forewarning for people who are like, oh, we can like basically do whatever we want to orphans. God has a very strong sense of justice. Every single person that was involved with the illegal kidnapping of my children ended up with serious consequences from that. My mom, 6 years after that happened, died of stage 4D uterine cancer. The mom of that adopted my firstborn, she ended up getting skin cancer. Her firstborn daughter ended up dying of cancer. The people that got my second daughter, they ended up with a heinous divorce. And the dad ended up having to fight for custody because she didn't actually even love my daughter, because she became jealous of them, and they had like a heinous divorce. So there is like really strong scripture, and God does not go back on his word when it says like vengeance is mine when it comes to like widows and orphans. And the thing is even if an orphan gets a family, in God's eyes, they're still an orphan. Mm-hmm. So don't mess with us orphans, because God will smite you. Like, I no joke about that. Like, it was just like, it was astonishing to see like how broken these people became. Yeah, just because of all of that. So
you had 3 biological children yourself.
I've had 4. I've had 4 biological children.
Okay.
So so I left this really abusive relationship. And God said to me, he said, go online. And he's like, I want you to look for an Asian guy. He was like very specific about this. And I was like, what is up with this Asian thing? Like, I've never dated Asians before. And he was like, I want you to go online, find an Asian guy. So I came across this profile, and God was like, this is the person that you're going to end up with. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, whatever. So we like meet, and like, I'm just thinking like, it's just going to be kind of like fun and like nothing serious. Well, this guy ends up like falling madly in love with me. His family just ends up like allowing me to stay there. And then he happens to be Buddhist. His family is Buddhist. And I was like, okay, this is kind of weird. I'm like, because my relationship with God was sort of like, Christianity works for all of the good people, but it's not really working for me, because I'm like, I'm just too defective. I'm too broken. God's done with me, closed chapter, end of story, right? God has such a sense of humor. So this one summer, we were kind of like still dating, and he was like going on his own search for God. I did not know this. Like, he kept this very like private. And he came across this video of a girl who had died and like went to hell and went to heaven. And he started asking me all of these questions this one day. And he's like, can you tell me how to become a Christian? And I was just like, I can tell you how to become a Christian. Like, I know all of the ins and outs of how to become a Christian. So I'm telling him about like the cross and salvation and all of this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And then he ends up like accepting Christ. And then he looks at me and he's like, well, what about you? And I was like, it doesn't work for me. I'm too defective. Like, you're fine. Like, you're going to heaven. Like, I'm not sure what's happening with me, but good luck with that. And he's like, well, don't you think that you should pray? Like, isn't this like a really good time to pray since I just accepted the Lord? And I was like, I guess. Like, I was not like, it's not that I was mad at God. I was just trying to figure out like, if I was so close to him with everything that happened with my kids, like, why didn't it work? And I couldn't, at that time, I didn't realize that it was just parents' agenda. It was just their agenda to destroy my life. And I really thought that God did it to punish me, but it wasn't like God punishing me. It was just my parents punishing me.
Yeah.
And so I sat there a little bit, And I was just thinking about the word grace just kept ringing through my brain. It was just grace, grace, grace. And I was like, I'm not sure if I can accept anything else right now, God, because this is like all so heavy for me. But the grace seems pretty light. I think I can carry that much for right now.
Yeah.
And so I just accepted grace and I was like, okay, like I accept grace and I accept your forgiveness and somehow you're going to make this all make sense. So I pray and like we had like some really weird like stuff happen. Like we saw like angels in the room. Like it was like a very spiritual, like
Yeah.
heavy spiritual moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So after we're like done with this, like 2 days later, Brendan says to me, he's like, well, don't you think we should get married? And I was like, mm-mm, like not this girl. I'm not getting married again. Like I was like, nope, nope, nope. And so I was like, okay, God. I was like, if it's your will for us to get married, I said, you're going to provide a way for us to pay for this wedding without going into debt and without asking his parents. Well, God has a very clever sense of humor and he uses the weirdest things to heal us. And so I was looking for photography jobs in New York because I don't live too far from the United States border on the New York side. And I happened to see this thing that said surrogacy. We need surrogates. And I'm like, well, I've already like, gone through, pregnancy and like I'm really healthy and I haven't done drugs and all of this kind of other stuff. And so I became a surrogate. Now, the funny thing about this is I didn't know this at the time, but the people that I gave a surrogate for, her mom was like this really huge, hardcore Christian from Florida.
Mm-hmm.
I happened to deliver the same day that I got married the first time when I was 19 with my first husband that I had the two girls with.
Mm-hmm.
She walks into the delivery room and she says, by the way, she's like, God told me that your soul wounds are healed today.
Mm. Wow.
And we got married 2 weeks after that. We got baptized and we've had like this amazing journey. I'm about to do another surrogacy. I have a business now. My book, Elevators of My Life, won an award. It won an Impact Award for 2021. I do life coaching. I've done speaking for anti-trafficking. I've done like a whole bunch of stuff for people. I'm just really compassionate. I love helping people. I really feel like God had like a bigger plan in all of this. And so, I talk, and I help families that have adopted, kind of go through like, how should they do this and how should they do that? I do that on, sometimes on Friday, I join like a clubhouse group that, deals with adoption. I write for
a great
coaches.
resource for it.
Yeah. So God just like took this grubby little life and and it's so funny because like the book The Shack, it's like so memorable for me because like I was literally brought to a shack, like literally like 2 miles like from the hospital. And, I grew up in a shack and like it was so profound. And so I always tell people like don't allow your shack moments to define your future because you never know what your future is going to hold. And I'm just really thankful that I healed. One of the key components that I used for healing was Holocaust survivors. I spent 7 months, over 10,500 hours, watching the Holocaust, like stories and movies and documentaries and kind of what led up to that. That was a huge, huge resource for me. And then suddenly I was just like, okay, God, like it's done. And I was just able to surrender the pain and just really allow love to embrace me and encompass me. And it was just like, okay, God, this is exciting now. Life is great. I'm okay. It's joyful. It's all going to work out. Right.
Yeah.
And, and it's crazy because like just the amount of people that I've been able to share my story with, like coming from this place of healing and going through all of that, it definitely is a testimony of what grit and faith and grace will get you and like how much God loves you. And this whole thing that, God is for you, even if life is against you, because sometimes life is not always for you. Life is really messy. It can be really devastating, but by grace, God is faithful in the mess. Right. And so, I've just really, God's my best friend, and I love him so much. He's just taken me to so many on so many levels of like healing and completeness. And it's just great because like I get to nourish my inner kid every day, and it's like, okay, God, like just another adventure, and starting another surrogacy journey. I just signed the contract. I'm starting medications in like 7 days now, and just so many like amazing things. And I'm
So
like,
this is going to be your second surrogacy journey.
yes, yes,
So just to recap so that I got it in my head correct. So you
yes,
had two baby girls
yes,
from a first marriage or a relationship,
yes.
right? And
First
then
marriage. Yep, first
the
marriage. I was
father,
married.
or did those two go up for adoption, or did they just go with their father?
No, they got kidnapped. They got kidnapped through my parents' cults.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, that's right. Because this was with your husband and they manipulated with the
Yep,
immigration and all
yep.
that. Now,
Mm-hmm.
these last two pregnancies were those surrogacy or
No, my last two pregnancies. So after all of that happened, I was working in San Antonio, and my boss was like, I'm gonna go out with a whole bunch of kooky Canadians. Do you want to come? And I was like, sure. Like I have like nothing else going on at my time. This was like a year, and like literally a year to the day that all of this like finally was like finalized. And my husband was back in England. He abandoned me. My parents literally had nothing to do with me, and so I was like, sure. Like I have nothing else going on for me. So I met this guy. He was 15 years older than me. I was
okay, that is
23.
in the book. Yeah, okay.
That is in the book.
Yeah.
And he was, I was 23, and I was not thinking anything romantic. Like I'm like, I'm just here to like for like a dinner thing, but he
Right.
was like really really fascinated with me. And I told him the very first night that I was with him, I was like, I've been through a lot of stuff. Like I am not in a place to be married. I'm not in a place of like really good mental stability right now. Like I've just gone through a lot. And I literally told him in one single breath, well, up to what I knew at that point. So like, I told him about my kids, I told him like about my family, I told him like all of this stuff. And he was like, my gosh, he's like, I want to keep you. You're really honest. And that was kind of what attracted him. Like that's why he was attracted to me, because I was just a super honest kid. I mean, I was 23. I was a kid. Like literally, I was a kid.
Right. Mhm.
And but I guess he thought I was gorgeous, and you know, kind of trophy wife-ish. Not that I fit the stereotype for that at all.
Right.
I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not blonde, I'm not tall or anything, but he thought, wow, like I get like a 23-year-old. And so I came back. I flew to Canada. He met me November 27th of 2003. He met me. He flew down again December 1st, and then I flew back with him December 6th, and I just like moved in with him. This is like how like it was a very very
Very
fast
fast.
relationship.
Yeah.
And being in Canada, getting on birth control is like really complicated, and so I ended up being pregnant. And he really wanted me to have an abortion because I was like super sick, and I was like, no. I said, I'm keeping this kid come hell or high water. Like it's my kid. If I die, I die. Like it's fine, but like I'm not having an abortion. And so I was praying, and I was like, okay, God, like just make me better. And within like 72 hours, like I was better, and then we had a baby. And for the first 3 years of our marriage, like it was good until I started having flashbacks, and until I found out that I was, because in one day, I found out that I was conceived out of rape
Yeah.
and incest. And then in that same 24 hours, I also found out that I was sexually trafficked at
Yeah.
3.
So the trauma was coming up
It
together.
was, it was just so much. And I didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And it's like, to go through all of that in a 24-hour period, like your psyche is not meant to handle that. I
Yeah.
don't care who you are. Like if you find out like truth like that, like you're going to be completely different.
Yeah.
And he had a lot of sexual issues, and he just kept pushing my boundaries sexually. And the more I said no, the more broken I was. And then when I said yes, just because I was saying yes. It was like I felt like I was being raped, and then he raped me legitimately, which I talk about in the book. He raped me legitimately after I had just been previously raped 24 hours prior. And I broke.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I broke. And I think by that point, I had just gone through so much. It was like my psyche was like, I literally had nothing
Yeah.
left at that
You were
point
at the
to
tipping
but
point. Yeah.
I was at the tipping point. I had already gone through so much. And if you read in the book, like, it was a really horrific situation. And I left because I didn't want my son to deal with the falling out of having a mentally ill mom, because I was making really, like, I was super suicidal, and I was really, really afraid that I was going to kill myself while he was at school, because at that point I was doing okay because I was with him all of the time. And because I had just thrown myself into motherhood, I didn't really have time to reflect on everything that I had gone through. But then as
Yeah.
soon as he started kindergarten, I had all of this time. And I didn't want to homeschool him because I had so much trauma from my own homeschooling experience. And
Yeah.
I was like, what the heck do I do? Because
Yeah.
I knew as soon as he started school, I was going to start like falling apart. But I also knew that I had so much trauma from my own homeschooling experience. Like, I didn't think I could emotionally homeschool him well without having triggers. And I felt like I was kind of in this really bad spot for him because, like, I wanted to be a good mom,
Yeah.
but I also had all of these issues that I was like struggling with. And I was like, how do I do this? And
Yeah.
I really didn't know. And nobody in my immediate family had even gone through anything remotely like that. And my psychologists were sort of like, well, it's just a miracle that she's still here. And my husband's like, well, you can just get over it and just deal with it and be present. But then it was like hard because I was also a single mom for like half the month because he was a pilot. So there was like all of this, like, I literally felt like I was in a pressure cooker. And then I was being raped on top of that, which was also like eroding my self esteem and kind of causing me to have even more trauma. And I quit, and I feel so ashamed of that because, like, I think back and I was like, if I had just tried something different, if I had done something more, if I had just had more faith, like, maybe I could have made it work. But then at the same time, like, I realized that, like, God doesn't really want you in a marriage where you're being raped anyway, right? So like, but I do have like this conflict because I think about my son and I'm like, it sucks that you are in a broken family because of essentially me and having, broken mental health, because I could have just been like, I could have just gone with it and, just, but because I had sexual issues and I was saying no all the time, it kind of went into rape. And so it's a really hard, that's probably like my biggest,
Yeah.
if I had one regret, I think that's like my biggest regret, that I didn't heal fast enough for him to save that marriage and to
Yeah.
save him
But
from
we can't
dealing with
put
that.
time on healing. And it was so much, I don't think you even processed at the time. Even
No,
now, it's still a lot to process and to understand, as you talk about it, those emotions come up. There's still so much there.
it is, because it's like, and I've talked to my son about it, and I was like, you understand that, like, I didn't want you to find me dead because I was really, really struggling with suicide.
Is all
And
your
he's
kids now of age? They're all of age now, or?
so I had one child out of I actually did end up having a child out of rape during this time. And I tried to co-parent with my rapist. Like, there is like this thing inside of me, like, I really hate to quit on stuff and don't know what it is. Like, I just have like so much grit. And I was just like, I was already feeling bad about like the relationship with my ex-husband, and I was just like, nope, like, I'm gonna make it stay. But then um he came too close to killing me,
Mhm.
like really, really close to killing me. He ended up strangling me with a necktie, and I couldn't breathe. And then he took his hands and then he like covered my mouth too, as he had like the tourniquet around my throat. And I was like, I have to quit this. I didn't want to quit
Yeah.
it, but I was like, I have to quit it if I'm going to like live, because my son Scott needs me.
Yeah.
And I left, and you know, I tried to co-parent with him for like a really long time, and then it just became too dangerous, and I was just like, I have to let this go.
Yeah.
And I prayed about it. It was really hard for me. Like I prayed about it, and God was like, I'm not gonna judge you. He's like, you know, you did, and I wasn't gonna put, like, here in Canada, adoption laws are extremely different. You can't just put up a child for adoption.
Yeah.
Like you have to have like both parents sign like adoption papers. It has to
Yeah.
be done very legally, very ethically. And I was like, I'm not gonna just do that just because it seems like an easy way out for me. And I always seem to take the hard road, even when it comes to like other people's feelings and other people's things. Like I'm not one of those people that I don't make selfish decisions like on a whim. Like I really think about like, okay, how is this going to affect you? How is this going to affect me? How is this going to affect the kids? And I really tried to make that relationship work, but I just realized like he was way too broken for me, and I needed to be in a space where I could heal and just feel love. So
Yeah.
I haven't had like with my youngest, like I'll be honest, like because of his dad's messed up like personality, I haven't heard from him in a really long time. I think it's been about 3 years.
Okay.
But I have a really tight relationship with my son. You know, I'm about to do surrogacy, and the intended father was like, yeah, like you can definitely be an aunt. So like there's gonna be like more like, I think, kind of like healing with that. So I think it's kind of interesting how God just like weaves all of these amazing healing journeys, like even when we're broken and we, you know, we make mistakes, you know, God is so, I guess, so faithful to cover our mistakes,
Yeah.
you know, and that we don't have to live with that condemnation, right? And that was the
Definitely.
thing that I really had to get through, because like for so long I was like, well, I messed up here and I messed up there and I'm just not getting this thing right. And I realized that it's not in the perfection that God cares about. It's in the gray. And I think that a lot of people live in a very gray, in low gray areas, because you know people have tried to, you know, co-parent during rape, and you know, because they didn't want to do adoption, they didn't want to do, and you know, however that works out, God's not like they're like judging us. He's like they're patting us on the back and say, you know what, you did your best. And I
Yeah.
think that's the thing that we miss, is that we
Definitely.
really just need to do our best.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be perfect. It's just do our best, and then
Yeah.
God just gives us grace to just do it better the next time, you know. And I have to say that I am pretty, if I can say this boldly, like I'm pretty proud of myself. Like I've been in a relationship now for 11 years. We're going on 11 years. We've done surrogacy together. We've done podcasts together on how to heal. You know, I have a coaching business now, and you know, he supports me with that. And it's like, wow, like coming from a place of like complete brokenness to say that I've been married, you know, I can hail, you know, hold down a 10-year relationship, you know, almost 6 years, you know, 6 years of marriage. Like that's pretty good. You know, that's pretty
Yes.
good
It's
coming
amazing.
from where
Yeah,
I've been, you know.
you've been through something that, like I said, would have killed many people, you know. So you should
And
be very
so
proud of where you are.
God is
Yeah.
gracious. God is so
I
gracious.
mean,
Like
and we
so
gotta wrap up. I could talk to you for a long
I know,
time,
I know. I
but
don't
we
know how long this
definitely,
one's gone on.
yeah. So, Elizabeth, I wish you a lot of success. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and
Thank you.
I wish you continued healing on this journey. Um, her book, let people know where they can get your book. What's
Yeah, so my book, Elevators of My Life, it's on Amazon, I think pretty much worldwide. So you can get it in the States, you can get it in Canada, you can get it in England, Brazil, Australia, South Africa. Yeah,
yeah.
I think you can get it in most countries. You can get it in hardback, paperback, and on Kindle. I think it's free on Kindle actually. If you have Kindle,
Yep.
you can get it for free. Yep.
Yeah, it's a great testimony, and thank you for sharing with our listeners. And we're gonna close this elevator.
Yeah, we'll close this one. We'll close this one.
And like I said, just continued success, continued blessings on your
Thank you.
journey, and continued healing. And I'm sure your testimony will definitely be helpful to others. So if you are out there, you're a woman, you've dealt with adoption, you were adopted, you were abused as a child, you were sex trafficked, and you feel like there's no one out there you could talk to, definitely reach out to Elizabeth. She can definitely help you through it. When I tell you, this is a story that most people wouldn't have survived. I mean, and she's really sensitive in the book about it, because there are areas about being suicidal and stuff like that. So she's very sensitive about the topic. And just know that there's light. Just look for the light. There's light out there. When you're in a lot of darkness and there's darkness around you, sometimes you just look for the light. That's it. Sometimes you don't know the next step, just look for the light.
Yes.
So Elizabeth, thank you so much. And
Thank you.
as always, I appreciate you so much. Okay.
Thank you so much, Janie. And
All
you
right.
have an amazing weekend and have a great day. And I will be praying for you. And I wish you the best of luck on your podcast and all of your other guests. You have a very awesome story. I love you so much. And I hope to meet you in person one of these days. Like, we should have coffee sometime.
Yeah. Let me know when you're here in Atlanta in the US.
I will. Are you in Atlanta?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You're not going to believe this. My IEP's family lives in Atlanta.
Really?
Yes. We're gonna have to exchange some information and get together when I come down.
Definitely.
Yes,
let me know when you're here.
I will definitely, sweetie. Have a great afternoon. Have a great evening.
I appreciate you. Take care.
Oh, you're welcome. All right. Bye-bye.